Hi, Speech 1321 class. If I can talk today, Speech 1321, my online class. So I hope that you've been taking a look at chapter 1 in your book, The Communicating for Results. And what this little video lecture is going to concentrate on today first is I want to give you 3 focus questions for this chapter. Okay, because this chapter is pretty dense, so there's a lot to it, and then as we proceed, we'll kind of relate the material back to the business professional situation. But this is the communication theory part, so it's kind of sets up the whole framework for the rest of the course. And so I want to give you 3 questions to think about as you go through this material. So the first one is, what is communication? I mean, obviously, we could probably all come up with some operational definition, and your book does, right? Your book has a nice 1-sentence definition of communication, but that's not enough. It doesn't really tell us anything. And so we're going to then get into the model, because you notice as you look at the pages of chapter 1, you have 3 diagrams, and one of those diagrams is the transactional model of communication. And so we're going to focus on that to try to answer this question, what is communication? But communication's not the problem. It's miscommunication that's the problem. And think of the word, look at the word, miscommunication, M-I-S communication. It's quite literally a communication that's missed, right? The message that the sender sent, or the message that I intended to send, was not received in the manner that I meant it. So, and that's another key component. So the message is our key term in this field. The message is the content. That's what I'm trying to communicate, right? So the message. And what we're after is shared meaning between, if I'm the one who's initiated the communication and I've sent you all a message, kind of like right now in this video, then I'm hoping that you will understand and connect what I'm saying, to your own frame of reference, and that it will mean something to you, that we will share meaning, right? You will understand something new. So anyway, so what is communication? So we're going to be focusing and breaking down that model and looking at that process. But as we said, the problem is not communication, it's miscommunication. And this is really where it's not just businesses. This really impacts all of us in any aspect of our lives, but it's particularly significant for businesses in the business professional world, because every year businesses lose millions of dollars due to silly miscommunications, right? So what's going on? Why do so many miscommunications occur that cost us money? And not only money, because this is what we forget. Every time we miscommunicate, there's a cost, right? So for businesses, it's usually money, okay? It costs some dollar signs. But it can also cost us time. It could cost us a relationship. If we miscommunicate in a relationship, or we feel like we're not communicating, we're not being heard, we're not being seen, we're not being understood. Maybe it even cost you a grade at some point. Maybe you had a misunderstanding with a teacher and it cost you a grade. And at its most serious, miscommunication costs lives, can cost lives. I've had a lot of my veterans, right, my students who are military veterans, give me examples of when, that miscommunication either cost lives or potentially could have. So it's a serious matter, and again, for businesses, it's money. So I want you to think of a time as we go through this material, but right now, I want you to think of a time that a miscommunication cost you something, right? And it can be humorous. Some of them are humorous. They're just silly, right? But or it can be more serious. But think of that time. And you might want to jot it down real quick. Jot it down in your notebook so you don't forget it. Because I'm going to give you some examples of miscommunications, and I want you to think of your own. And in a minute, I'm going to give you my example. And then after we go through chapter 1 and we really take a look at this transactional model, we're going to come back and we're going to diagnose what went wrong. Intuitively, we can probably figure it out, but what's really going on according to a communication theory perspective? And then that will hopefully give us insight into the third focus question, which is how can we minimize the potential for miscommunication, right? So there we have it. What is communication? Why do so many miscommunications occur? And then how can we minimize the potential for miscommunication? So let's talk cost. So before we look at those models, let's see what's at stake. Let's see why this is important to us, to our own lives, and also to business professionals in a business professional context, which is what this course is, right? So first, I'm going to give you my personal example of when a miscommunication almost cost one of my he's now one of my colleagues, thank goodness, almost could have cost him his job. And yes, it was me. So here's what happened. Many years ago, I was the theater coordinator. Okay. And we were trying to get this particular instructor certified to teach technical theater here at the college. Okay. And UTEP had dropped its master's program, and it didn't have a there was no way he could reside here and go to UTEP and pick up a master's in technical theater to keep his position here. And we needed a technical theater instructor very badly, but he had so much professional experience. He knew what he was doing. He had, worked professionally and was well qualified to teach the course and to be our technical director here. So the college has something called alternative certification, where you can put together a presentation. It's basically a persuasive presentation, and it's a big deal. You have to present it in front of several deans and a committee and everything else, and then it goes to the VP as well. And you can vote then to say, yes, you have made your case. This instructor is qualified to teach this course, even though technically the instructor does not have a master's, at least a master's in this field of study. So this is a big deal, right? So the meeting was at Rio Grande. Fortunately, all parties that were involved, we arrived early, thank goodness, at least 2 hours early. But one of the key presenters for this presentation was another instructor, and he had a class. So he was coming from Valle Verde, so he wasn't there yet. And he had texted me earlier in the day and said, "Hey Lisa, what room are we in for the presentation?" So I texted back, "Oh yeah, we're in room 211 or whatever it was." And so there we are at Rio Grande campus, which is where the meeting was. And this colleague I'm referring to, who is a key part of the presentation, is normally early, right? Very punctual. We're kind of wondering, well, where's Keith? And so then about, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes later, he calls me and he's like, "Lisa, uh, where's room 211? I'm walking all over Valle Verde and I can't find it." So he was at the Valle Verde campus. I had failed in my text to confirm that the meeting was actually at the Rio Grande campus. He assumed it was at he assumed it was at VV, and I assumed that he knew it was at RG. So thank God, because he made it. he had enough time to make it. We started on time. The presentation went very well, and my colleague is now my colleague. He's teaching at the college now, thank goodness. But oh my goodness, if we hadn't all been early, if the show would have gone on, we would have done the presentation, but what if it hadn't been as effective because he had a big part in it, Keith did. What if they hadn't bought that presentation without him? It could have cost this poor man his job, and he had a wife and a new baby. I felt terrible, but it was a lesson well learned that in text messages, often the information gets condensed because we're writing it, we're texting it. Whereas if we had been on the phone, that probably would have gotten clarified. It probably would have. So that's my example of a time a miscommunication almost cost me something, because it would have cost me that wonderful instructor who's still here, and it could have cost him the job. So that's the first one. So you think of yours. Now I'm going to give you some earlier ones. This edition of the Communicating for Results book, it gives you the Pepsi one and the Alka-Seltzer one. But the examples that the earlier edition of this book had, I think, were just way better. And they're older examples, but nonetheless, they're still pertinent, right? They're still pertinent. And so let me get a prop, because I'm going to have to demo this for you. So how many of you out there, I obviously can't see you, how many of you out there like Dr. Pepper, the soda? Do you like to drink Dr. Pepper? Anybody? Okay. So back in the 1970s, there was this great commercial that Dr. Pepper had that was very catchy. I was little. We would sing it on the playground, and not only that this commercial was extremely successful. It really helped to sell more Dr. Peppers. I believe Coca-Cola is the one who produces Dr. Pepper. So it made the company tons of money here in the US. Everyone's happy. And in the olden days back then, if you were a musician who was trying to make it, so you're the starving musician trying to make it big with your band, you could make money by composing what were called jingles. Jingles, J-I-N, like jingle bells, right? Jingles. And these were original scores, musical scores, and lyrics too, that you could sell, that a company would tell you what they wanted and they could hire you, and you'd write this jingle so they could put it with their commercial and you'd get paid. Kind of like actors and actresses a lot of times have to wait tables. They have to be waiters and waitresses while they're waiting to get the big part as they're auditioning. So anyway, you could pay the rent and write these jingles, and that's what this was, this popular Dr. Pepper jingle. And of course, I feel the need to demonstrate it for you, so just bear with me. It went something like this. I'm a pepper, you're a pepper, wouldn't you like to be a pepper too, Dr. Pepper? Can I spit in my chair? A drink, Dr. Pepper. Okay, always the jazz hands, Klaus. And I'll give you a link probably in announcements or somewhere, and you can actually look this old 1970s commercial up on YouTube. Okay. So like I said, and we're all singing, I'm a pepper, you're a pepper, wouldn't you like to be a pepper too? Okay. And it has this whole thing. There's such and such peppers. There's these peppers. Don't you want to be a pepper? Okay. So when Coca-Cola turns around and tries to use the same commercial in Great Britain, right? And it didn't work. They couldn't figure it out. They actually lost money because it costs money to produce these commercials, right? So here's what happened. What came out in the analysis of why did this commercial work so well in the US, but we lost money on it in Great Britain. What came out in the analysis is that the word pepper at the time was British slang for prostitute. Okay, so now it wasn't the name of the soda. They already knew what Dr. Peppers were. It's the name of the soda. That was not the problem. It was the commercial, because pepper means prostitute. So here's what they're hearing. I'm a pro, you're a pro. Wouldn't you like to be a pro too? Okay, so they're hearing be a prostitute. And no offense to sex workers, all right? But at the time, this was just not, obviously, this was not the message that was intended to be sent. So, hence, either the Brits were just laughing laughing their, let's be frank, laughing their asses off at us, or possibly were offended by it, right? So, that was the analysis. It's silly, it's kind of funny, and if you go watch the commercial, like I said, I'll give you the link later, listen and kind of substitute in your mind what they were hearing, prostitute, and you'll see maybe why it didn't go over so well. But again, on the more serious side, Coca-Cola loses millions. Next example. So I don't know if I have any car buffs in this class. I have a couple in some of my face-to-face classes if you like to work on old cars. But there was a car called the Chevy Nova, Nova, the Chevy Nova. And you can look that one up too and see what it looked like. Kind of a pretty cute little car. Now, and it was made by GM, right? GM, General Motors. So what does Nova mean in English, right, in the US? And this was a very popular car. It was cool, man. So what does Nova mean? You can Google it at home if you want to, although I'm going to tell you what it means right now. So Nova is an exploding star, right? It carries that connotation. And so the idea is, the Chevy Nova, man, there's lots of energy produced, right? When a star explodes. Woo, it gives you that implication in English that, whoa, this is a cool car, kind of like space, exploding star, lots of energy. We're going to go fast. All right. Very successful in the US. Turn around. GM tries to sell the vehicle in Mexico, and it doesn't work out again. They lose money on this car. They lose money on this vehicle in the ad campaign. Again, what comes out when they go back and analyze? Well, it may be Chevy Nova in English, but in Espanol, it's the Chevy Nova. Okay. The Chevy No-Go, right? The Chevy Nova. And who the hell wants to buy a car that's not going to go? Again, class, silly miscommunications, but they cost these companies tons of money, right? So, third example. Anybody into Mars? Have you been, I don't know if I have any space people out there. How about any star people? Star Trek? Live long and prosper? Star Wars? Star Wars. Battlestar Galactica. Anything with star in it. Well, anyway. So, if you've been following the Mars mission, it's very fun. We're getting soil samples, the rovers roving all over Mars. It's pretty cool. You can look at actual pictures again. Put in, Google it, put in images of the recent Mars mission. And if you pull up some of those pictures, I'm not kidding you, it looks like El Paso. All right, just kidding. Well, some of them kind of do, and it is kind of cool. But anyway, I digress. We may have had all of that sooner if this had not happened. So there was an original Mars Climate Orbiter, right? The original one. And I want to say I'm not going to give you the date because I'm not sure of it. I'll look it up for you later. You can look it up. But the original Mars Climate Orbiter. So here's what happened. And it was supposed to go into orbit around Mars and take pictures of the atmosphere. It wasn't going to land or anything. It was just going to orbit, take pictures. So Lockheed Martin which was originally a British company. Okay, it's American now, but Lockheed Martin built the spacecraft. NASA, of course, operated the spacecraft. They're mission control. They're helping operate it. So Lockheed Martin and NASA are coordinating on this bazillion-dollar project. Watch this. When computing the force of the small control thrusters, which is what, I don't have anything that's round, which is what kept, I don't know, say this is which is what kept the orbiter, my head's the planet, ha ha ha, which kept the orbiter in orbit around Mars. Of course, it'd be a lot littler. All right, I'm really losing it, class. Here, let's make this the orbiter. Okay. So when computing the force of the small control thrusters, which is what keeps the orbiter at the proper distance from the planet, Lockheed Martin used pounds, which is a British measure, and NASA used newtons, which is a metric measure. And if you remember this from your elementary science classes, they are not equivalent. A newton does not equal a pound. Are you with me? So therefore, the computations were all off, and the orbiter, right, was in orbit too close to the Mars atmosphere, was sucked into the atmosphere, and kaboom! Goodbye, bazillion-dollar Mars orbiter, right? Can you imagine? When your math and science teachers are telling you to carry your units, they are not kidding, right? You make sure that you're dealing in the correct units. So that was the mistake. And these are rocket scientists making this mistake. Can you imagine? All the complex computations. And it was a communication error. It was an assumption that literally blew the whole thing up. So again, class, silly, but costly, right? Costly. So I want you to, again, keep these examples in mind, because on the next lecture, we're going to start looking at these different models, the ones in your book, right? The first one, the circular one, and then our transactional model, to break down this process of communication. And then once we learn the vocabulary of the transactional model, we're going to actually go back and very specifically diagnose what happened, where that breakdown happened according to the terms from the model. And then we're also going to apply them to my example, and you can hopefully then use the terms and apply them to your example. So what is communication? Why do so many miscommunications occur? How can we minimize miscommunication? What could these rocket scientists have done to make sure that they were on the same page, right? That they were using the same units. So the costs, there is a cost, and that is why we should all care about this. Okay, so that's all for today. Think of your example. Next lecture, we're going to start talking about the models. Stay tuned.